Vendador is a private dining company, but what that really means is that we're basically a moving restaurant that creates personalized experiences for people. So that's either within your home or an event space that people have rented. From start to finish, we basically just designed the entire event for you, whether that's in the evening or afternoon or whatever it may be. And it really kind of allows people to be able to sit back and enjoy the time that they're spending with people without having to think about, doing any of the cleaning or the grocery shopping or the cooking or whatever is left over at the end of the night once you've been drinking and don't want to wake up the next morning and have to clean or whatever it is, right? The process is honestly very cool because we just have one conversation one time before we ever send somebody a proposal, and then we go back and forth until we really finalize things. And then from there, it's like they don't have to lift a finger. We'll bring all of our own plateware, glassware, silverware, and really create an experience that is very much tailored to them. The menu is very much tailored to them. The drinks are very much tailored to them. And it really creates a very unique experience for people. The truth is that people have a lot going on with their lives, right? And this might just not be your biggest forte. Like maybe you are a foodie, and very likely you are because you're hiring us, but you might just not know that much about it. And I think teaching the history of where the thing came from, where we found it, how we sourced it, how we prepared it, I think is something that people are very much interested in. And it's a really big part of what we enjoy doing as well. It's kind of telling the story of those ingredients and how it pertains to the evening. So I was born in 1994 in Tirana, lived all of my life while I was in Albania in Tirana, and we got to do a lot of traveling, which is really great. My mom's side is from Shkodra, and then, or at least like her mom's side is from Shkodra, and then my dad's side is from Gjirokastra and some from Korça predominantly. We tried to leave Albania several times during that period and try to go to other countries, but ultimately got accepted into the US, came here in 2004 and moved just right outside of Chicago. And it was just my immediate family, just my parents and my older sister. But I think the story with a lot of Albanians is that they at least had somebody that they knew here. Like we didn't know anybody, right? Like, and my parents didn't really tell me that we were leaving until like a week before we left. And I mean, it's just a lot, right? Like as Albanians, we have tons of friends and community and family around us all the time. So I think they did it in a way to protect us, but I didn't really know. And then all of a sudden it just like happened so quickly. Probably within a week and a half or two, I was back in school all over again. I feel like I'm pretty adapted at this point, but in the beginning it was very evident that we had a really different support system. I think a lot of people here are way more individualistic. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it is just so different. Like the people in your lives in Albania are so involved in everything that's going on. I mean, like, it might be one of the things that I love the most about my community, and probably one of the things that I like the least about it too, right? It's just like you can't get a second to yourself. The food aspect, I think one thing that's really great about having grown up in a country like Albania, especially at the time, was the proximity to like fresh ingredients. If you don't live in the major city, you're either a farmer or you're a fisherman, right? So you go to where there is the highest concentration of people every day to sell your product. So for us, it was like going to a farmer's market every day, right? There was no such thing as like a frozen food section. And I think another really big difference that we have is the seasonality, right? Like you don't eat asparagus 365 days a year. It's like you eat it when it's that season. And it was always such a big personal thing because we raise a lot of our own livestock, right? Like I remember like a rite of passage, like by the time I was 6, I was killing lambs. And it's such a normal thing for you to do. And then you preserve the entire animal, you use it. Like I'm sure every Albanian household has a sheepskin rug or something, you know what I mean? Like, or you keep the wool and then you use the entire thing. So a huge part of our culture is also just like when you go to an Albanian person's house, like they just take out the nicest of everything that they have and they offer it to you, right? I think hospitality more than food has been a really big part of my upbringing and a huge reason as to why I do what I do now. The things that I remember most would be like the big celebrations where like all the family would get together and we would get like a couple of lambs and go to like the mountains, right? Like Maldaiti, like, so, and which is right outside of Tirana. Like we would go there and just roast whole lambs, lay on the floor. Basically everybody just brings picnic stuff and blankets and etc. And just like you sit there all day, and it's like an endeavor that lasts the entire day. Those are some of my favorite memories for sure. Favorite Albanian food, I would say I love tavdeo, which for anyone that doesn't know what it is, it's basically like a giant clay pot in which you're cooking like beef livers and then fergiz and peppers, and you basically just bake it in a giant clay pot and you eat it with bread, and it's basically like a dip, if you will. So food's always been really relevant in my life from an early age. And like I never grew up cooking, like because we just had people in our family that always cooked, right? Like my mom or my grandma, like they were always cooking. Like we never ate out. Like here is a big thing where you eat all the time, or you go out as a family. Like we never ate out. Even when we came to the United States, like we were just cooking at home. I think my favorite times in life have been around a dinner table. It's the experience that I loved most as a kid, and I think it's in a way like the experience that I miss most in my life now, that I try to recreate for other people. So like I said, the hospitality aspect has been the biggest driving factor towards doing this entire thing, although like I've very much fallen in love with cuisine altogether. A big part of our community in Albania was just like you become the best thing or the best version of yourself that you can in order to give back to your community, and like that is success, right? Whereas here it's like you always have to be number one in the US, right? It's just like you have to be the best at this thing or you're not relevant. And within our community, it's not that. It's just like you do your part, which obviously growing up in a place that had a lot of communist influence, that's what commune means, right? It's just like you all live in this little thing where everybody has their role to play. It's not just because of having grown up in Albania and like this thing of like, oh, like you're a man, like this is your role. Like I have some of that. Just because of my upbringing, but really I don't find that it's like super relevant. I think no matter what, people have to be able to contribute and want to contribute, and I do think that overall you will live a happier life if you subscribe to some sort of meaning into this thing that you want to pursue, especially as like Albanians. I mean, even as Americans, like I think this is a really relevant thing to talk about, is how we're like the first generation to really be able to pursue meaning. Like it's crazy that I get to do this with my life and like do something that I really enjoy and love doing, because my parents didn't get to do that. My grandparents certainly didn't get to do that. But on that note, like I think I'd really love for people to kind of know how and why we're so proud in so many ways. Like my parents are both in finance. They both had master's degrees and that sort of thing. Then they came here and all of a sudden those things are not relevant anymore. So now my mom and my dad, they're washing bathrooms without a degree. And now they're working 3 jobs that are not in their fields, going back to school overnight while raising children, all in order to be able to give us this opportunity. And it's obviously something that's a topic that's very, deeply emotional for me, because I'm just like, I think about my day-to-day life. There's plenty of things that I complain about what my day-to-day life looks like, but I'm like, I can't imagine being 40 somewhere where you don't speak the language, or where people are now looking down on you and you're on your hands and knees cleaning bathrooms. It ties in back into the idea that like you need to be doing your part in order to give back to the community. Like I think especially if you're born in a place of privilege, then you need to be using that privilege for good. So, and that's not just for Albanians, that's for anyone that's really watching this. So I think right out of high school, I didn't necessarily know 100% as to what I wanted to do. I moved to Chicago. At some point I was living with somebody that I was dating at the time, and they were going to culinary school, and like I kind of like had my foot in the door from that. We were living in Lakeview at the time, and we walked down the street to a breakfast spot to have breakfast, and I saw one of my friends that I knew from high school and middle school and that sort of thing, and he was working in the kitchen. I asked him for an opportunity to just come work there. He got me a job there, and 2 weeks later he left. So I basically like ended up getting the position that he was getting there, and the person that owned that place used to be the maitre d' for a restaurant called Japanese. So he got me an opportunity to stage there. I showed up, I didn't have knives or anything. Like I showed up to work there, and the chef basically gave me his cutting board and his knife and asked me to cut some chives. And I cut the chives, and I didn't think that they were small enough, so I ended up mincing them, and I just didn't know any better, right? So he came back and he laughed at me, but then basically gave me the opportunity to intern there for a couple of months. And every day I would show up, and he'd give me 1 potato, and I would have to do a bunch of different knife cuts and show him. And then on my weekends off, like I had no money or anywhere else to be, kind of thing, because I left my parents home. So I would just like sit at home and practice knife cuts and that sort of thing. And then a few months later, I ended up getting the job. From there, I stayed there for a couple of years, and then we reconcepted and rebranded as Japanese by Morimoto, which was very cool because I used to watch all the Iron Chef stuff when I was younger, and I loved the opportunity. I stayed there for about 1.5 years after that, and then the chef de cuisine of Japanese at the time was leaving to open a place called Momotaro. So I ended up leaving there. I stayed at Momotaro for a couple of years, met some really awesome people. Some of the people that I met there had worked with a chef of what would become Royster. So that's kind of how I got the opportunity to kind of meld all of them together. And then I left Momotaro to go work at Royster, and then I was at Royster with the Albanian group for 4 years. um, and then left there, did a little bit of traveling, staged at some restaurants, kind of like was figuring out where I wanted to go next. Decided that I was going to move to Napa Valley and work at a 3-star Michelin restaurant out there, but then COVID hit. And then I was in this limbo of like, is everything going back to normal? Are we going back to restaurants? What's going on? So I started cooking dinners out of my house just to stay busy, because I was used to working 100-hour weeks. And I basically just got bored. And that's kind of how Vendador started, at least in the beginning, was like I posted it on Instagram that I was doing these meals. I got like 60 orders the first week because people were also just like supporting small businesses, which is really cool. I did that for, I don't know, maybe 2 months. And then one of my purveyors from Regalis, which is where we get a lot of like our seafood and specialty items from, they reached out to me and they're like, do you want to do a private event? I did one. I was like, well, I just made in one day what I would otherwise make in a week. The business model switched pretty quickly. And then I guess the rest is history. That's where we are now. Some of the things that were really helpful for me in the beginning was, I played soccer my whole life. So I really liked the team aspect of it. You can't win alone, right? So it's the same thing with restaurants. It's just like everyone has to be playing this part in order for a service to go well. And I think the second thing was, I grew up in basically a communist country, right? Like, and just had a lot of regime in my life. I mean, my parents were incredibly militant. Everything around me was very militant. Like, I just always had that like hierarchy and that structure of what it was like to like operate here, and then you know you get good here, you move on to the next thing and climb the ranks. So I think those things were incredibly helpful to me. Like, I just never had an attitude. I just said yes, chef. I kept my head down and did my work. And outside of like my working hours, I just kept studying. To this day, I'm still very much obsessed with it. It's the only thing that's a constant in my life. I mean, like everything else in my life just kind of revolves around this in a way, and I just love it because to me it's my way of contributing and giving back. I think I was very fortunate to work at a lot of really awesome restaurants with a lot of people that are much better than me. A quote that I really live by is that like, if you want to take the island, you have to burn your boats, which really just means like there's no plan B. Like, I don't have something else that I'm thinking, I'm like, if this doesn't work, like, no, this is going to work by any means necessary. And I think you really have to have that kind of attitude, which is why I've always sought to work out of the best restaurants that I could. I think that kind of mentality is very much kind of the leading thought in all of these restaurants as well. It's like, I think working at Momotaro was very much like that. Mark Hellier was somebody that was incredibly talented as far as a chef is concerned. I think I learned a lot about flavor pairings at that restaurant, as well as a little bit of structure. But then, you know, say going to Royster, for example, where I worked with Andrew Brochu for, you know, almost 4 years. Not only is he a phenomenal cook and one of the best cooks that I've ever met, but just incredibly gifted at operations, which I think is a huge part of this entire thing. Because there's a lot of chefs that are very big creatives, but they just can't put everything together. And sometimes you get in trouble when you know how to make this exact thing, but you can't replicate it. So then I guess the business is always kind of dependent on you having to be there, and you can't teach it to somebody else, and you can't multiply it. Another person was, you know, Grant Atkins. He is the chef of the entire Alinea group. But I think that guy kind of has the ideology behind him that he's like this big creative, that he's doing stuff that like nobody's ever seen before, and like that is absolutely true. He's certainly that kind of person, and has obviously revolutionized the gastronomical industry in many ways. But the one thing that I would really say about him, that I really want people to take away from what I'm saying about this, is that he knows his basics so well that at any time he's just the best cook in the room, that it's like he can break those rules because he knows how to do the basics so well. I think food is very much like a personal thing. Like, that's like the thing that I nerd out about, that I can just like sit there and like work with these ingredients. It's the hospitality more than anything, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been to like an awesome dinner where maybe we just had way too many wine pairings, and like you're maybe even like super drunk at the end, of like you might not even remember all of the food, but you really remember the time that you had with everybody, and you really remember how you felt, right? And so for me, it's like, how do we create this environment for people to have an amazing time, and for this to be an incredibly memorable thing that you keep for the rest of your life? Because to me, like, that's what it's really about. It's like the memories that you take along the way, that you create along the way, that you can look back at and say, you know, we had a really awesome time here, and it was a giant celebration. And that's what we try to recreate as much as possible. I think the moment that I knew that I was going to just go with this full on, was when I saw like a really big need for what we were doing, realistically. I think I shifted my identity from I'm going to be in restaurants forever to just like I'm in hospitality and I don't have to like confine myself to it looking one certain way. Like if I have the opportunity to do the same thing that I was doing previously, but maybe through a different outlet, then I'll just take that different outlet. We were doing things at a smaller scale. Like when I first started, like that first dinner that I did, I went to like Goodwill and got some plates, right? Like, and I showed up by myself, and it was like an 8-top, and I went like 2 hours away, and charged them like nothing what I would charge now. You know what I mean? Like you're just learning all these things along the way. You know, you show up to these events, and like not everything is the way that you want it to be, and like maybe being Albanian is a part of what makes me like this, but definitely being a chef makes me a bit of a control freak in these instances where it's like, if I'm going to be the one that's creating this environment, like I have to like start from the beginning and then delegate along the way. So for us, it was just like, now we need all of our own inventory. Like now we need my whole kitchen. Like I can't just like work out of my house anymore. Like now we need plateware, glassware, silverware, linens. I mean, we need the entire staff to be there. We have a Somali on the team. We have cooks and chefs on the team. I think some advice that I would have, ultimately you have to follow your gut instinct. If you have the support, that's great. If you don't have the support, do it either way. I think my parents didn't really support me until they saw some success come. Ultimately, they want the best for you, right? Like, they want you to be a doctor and lawyer because it's going to have the largest kind of return on investment. But I think my advice overall is like, just jump, right? Like, I think there's never going to be a time in which it's perfect. Something that I kind of tell myself along the way is that like, when you started this thing, you didn't think it was going to be easy. And so in the times in which like you're going through it and it's difficult, you just have to remember like, this is what hard feels like. You know, for us, what we do in our business, like there's tons of data along the way of just like what's working, what's not working. Try to be hyper aware of the things that are not working and do less of them, and then do more of the things that are working and are actually giving you a return on your time and your investment. I think faith is really big. Like you have to have faith that it's going to work, that it's, you know, that you're doing the right thing. I mean, there's so many times where you're just like, dude, this sucks, right? Like that's a thing. Like I really want people to know that aspect of it, is that like, it's not going to be like flowers and rainbows all the time. You know, for some people it's God, for some people it's the universe, like whatever, however you want to look at it. I think you need something in terms of like faith-wise, even if it's yourself or whatever that it is. I'm not saying that it has to be something bigger than you or whatever, however you want to shape it. I think faith is a really big part of it. Like you have to have faith that it's going to turn out the way that you want it to turn out, for sure. I think our culture has been really helpful and beneficial in the way that I conduct business, primarily because of, I guess, the idea of Besa, which, you know, for us translates into faith, but really what it means is that like when you meet somebody, they start off at 100%, and they basically have to do like bad things in order to have things discounted from them. One way or another, it's like you must give to receive, and I think when you're the first to extend that hand and to come into, I guess, into the transaction or into the business, with the idea to give, especially without any expectations, I mean, it's such a special thing, right? Like, for us in our culture, it's a huge thing, like that your family and your lineage, that they're proud of you, and vice versa, and how you act is how you represent them. On a day-to-day basis, I constantly think like that, where I'm just like, what am I doing to make these people proud, right? Like, I know if you were to meet my mom, for example, and you're just like, I had a really nice time talking with Francis, blah, blah, that she would just be like, oh, I raised him well, right? And like, and that's such a proud moment for like an Albanian parent. But I think when it translates into the business, it's the exact same thing. It's like, you know, we lead with our best foot forward, and we bend over backwards to make sure that people are taken care of. It's a huge help. Another piece of advice that I would have, especially for like Albanian people specifically, and it doesn't matter whether you're born here or there, but I think, you know, especially if you're born there, it's like, really lean into the fact that like we are just known for being incredibly hardworking. Just because you're working a lot and it doesn't seem easy does not mean that it's not successful. I really want people to understand that, because I think people think that like you just like hit this stride and then it's just like, oh, like you just go by your day to day and everything works all the time. Like, lean into the fact that you were just taught to work all the time as a kid, and use those teachings, for sure. The origin of Vendador is really, it's a Latin-based name, meaning a vendor that has a small and intimate product that they're offering. And this really ties into my culture a lot, right? Because it's like I said, it's like those things, like when you first go to somebody's home, like they take out their nicest things and present it to you. And that's, you know, I think predominantly where the name kind of came from in my head. So I think the biggest difference between Vendador and going to, say, another fine dining restaurant that's within Chicago or wherever is how much you can really personalize the experience. When you go to a fine dining restaurant, they might be able to make certain modifications based on your allergies or dietary restrictions, but it's not that the entire menu is personalized to you, right? So some guests really leave it up to us and they're just like, do whatever you want. But some of them are just like, we really enjoy Mediterranean or Latin flavors or Asian flavors, and now we can build a menu not just only on using specific ingredients that are hyper, seasonal and also local, but also very much tailored to a specific client or to say the occasion, right? We always try to add in an element of surprise or something that's going to really make it incredibly personal for our client, and I think that's something that is not necessarily lacking in terms of like the fine dining world. It's just that for them, it's like one size fits all. It's like, this is the experience that you're getting here, and you might be coming here for this experience, but you can't do that just anywhere for anyone at any time with all of these different options, which is like, we can. I think people have this like notion of what a private chef would be, which is like, maybe the structure is that like the client pays for groceries and then you come into their home hours before and just like do this meal and then just like put it on the table. It's like, no, like for us it's an experience, right? Like we're doing everything ahead of time. We have our own kitchen to work in. We show up only 2 hours prior. We set the entire table, we set the entire mood, and then we basically run a restaurant service out of somebody's home. Everyone can have this experience, and that's a really cool thing about it. Like, it's not limited to a certain kind of structure. It can really be anything that you want it to be. And I think even one step above that is that like people only have X amount of experience, right? Like they might tell you that they want this certain thing, but they have no idea how to actually take it to completion, whereas like we do, and like we can one up it, right? It's just like being the professional in this thing is so important because you can really lead people to the thing that they ultimately want but don't necessarily know how to communicate it with you. I think some big successes that have happened with Vendador along the way are keeping a steady clientele base. I mean, it's crazy. Like that one's really, really big, right? Because I think for a lot of people, they're like, I'm going into business, like it's all exciting, and you have this like uninformed optimism, right? Where you're like, everything's gonna be great, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have to find clients. So I think a big success for myself has been to be able to establish myself in the community as like somebody that's a professional in this, and somebody that can provide people with exactly what they're looking for. I mean, we just got into a new kitchen. Like this is a huge success. Going from either operating in a home or working with friends in a shared space to finally be able to basically use your own capital to build this thing has just been amazing. I mean, it's a huge success to kind of have the idea of what something is going to look like and then put actual action steps towards saving to make this thing actually a reality. It actually blows my mind. I think sometimes people will come up to me and be like, that was the best meal I've had in my life, and I'm like, that's just insane. It's hard to take that compliment at times, right? Especially because some of these people, like, they travel all over the world and eat at some of the best restaurants. And maybe this is a part of like imposter syndrome or something, but it's like sometimes you're like, oh my God, is that really true? And then as long as they had an incredible experience and they really feel that way, then that's you were able to create that for them. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a success. I think my long-term goals with Vendador are going to be expanding it to other cities. And eventually other countries. And I think realistically, I just want to be able to be kind of a culinary director and fly around and help the teams succeed. But ultimately, it's about creating the environment for other people to thrive and just putting people in a position to win. And creating that environment for them to thrive is ultimately just going to make the business that much better. And I think it just, word of mouth is a big thing, and I think we'll expand even bigger that way. I think private dining is definitely growing a lot within the industry. Especially as people start to have more and more of these experiences. With our company specifically, like we've grown tremendously over the last couple of years because I think there's really a demand for it. And I think the fact that we're so specialized and personalized for clients makes it incredibly attractive to them. I definitely want to be at the forefront of like leading this thing. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that I'm the first person to ever own a private dining company or anything of the sort, or there's tons of improvements that we can make all the time, and I think that's a worthy aspiration, right? Like I think if I were the best that there was at this point in my life, I'm like, that kind of sucks because I have nowhere else to go but here, right? So for sure, I think I definitely want to be the best at this thing, and that's just a part of my character. And the more resources that I can gather, the more that I can give, and that's really the way that I look at it. If you have any occasions coming up or any celebrations, we'd love to be able to help you out with that. We're located in Chicago, but are willing to travel anywhere. And also, if you're a young chef and you need some mentorship, you can reach out to us via our website, or you can email us directly at chefs@vendador.com.